are here today, this morning, again, for the second time, backed by popular demand, to talk about quantum of disruption, and what it is that you can expect from this, not a course, not a program, as we have worded and advertised it, but from this 6-hour CrossFit intervention involving and causing a completely, dramatically different and alternative way to approaching known and globally practiced leadership paradigms and framework as we go into the future. When I first heard of Corona, I remember it was more or less last year, I think around about February, March. When I first heard of Corona, to me, it was, I viewed it as this, a thief in the night or a criminal out there, something that's happening over there in China. And fast forward, a year later, we all know that it's no thief in the night. It's not something that you can protect yourself from by just sitting at home and having a security fence around your property and maybe some security dogs and an alarm system. It's not something that you can keep out. It's not something out there. My father contracted Corona. Thank God he survived. My mother contracted Corona. My friends, colleagues at the workplace. I lost a very, very close friend that I worked with at a very young age. The gentleman was only 33 years old. So Corona, I think, or COVID-19, by now, a year later, we have experienced, all of us, someone either in the family or friends of friends, that has contracted the disease and then also sadly passed away from it. So it's no just another flu, as some ignorant people out there would refer to it. No, this is real. And it has disrupted our lives significantly. But here's the sad part. Well, not sad part, I mean, an interesting part, really. We do at Platform for Connected Leadership a lot of research in the field of leadership. We work with a lot of different companies, CEOs, C-suite, and we do various or deliver various leadership programs. And it's interesting. When we started to take a really critical look at what has happened during the past year, it was very interesting in our research how we noticed that very little of what we experience in the world today, this inequality, social inequality that was brought to the forefront through social media as the world went into lockdown, and we could see the clear distinction between wealthy and poor, and how the lockdown was playing out for so many of us. When we researched this, when we looked at it critically, we discovered that COVID-19 actually has very little to do with how the events in the world are currently unfolding. It's actually got very little to do with it. It's just another disruption. What has got a lot to do with it, so much more, actually stands central to what we are experiencing in the world today, is leadership. Now, this intervention, this CrossFit intervention, 6-hour CrossFit intervention, quantum of disruption, this is designed for business leaders that are serious about really changing how they lead organizations, really improving how they lead organizations. This is not just another course. It's not just another program. It's for leaders like you who want to move beyond the equipped competencies of typical leadership development programs out there that's being offered globally. It's for leaders like you who challenges the current way of the world. So let me contextualize. What is quantum of disruption? Where does the name come from? Where did it all start? Well, I'm going to give you the explanation by referring to quantum in physics. Okay, in physics, a quantum is the minimum amount of any physical property involved in an interaction. That's how we describe and how we explain it. So quantization of energy and its influence on how energy and matter interact is part of the fundamental framework for understanding and describing nature. Now, just like quantum theory is the theoretical basis in modern physics that explains the nature and behavior of matter, we, so to speak, metaphorically borrowed the term quantum as we try to explain human behavior under a state of disruption. What is the interaction between disruption and leadership? As leadership struggles in dealing with letting go of what I call known shorelines, not willing to lose sight, struggling to letting go of known shorelines and sailing off into the dark oceans and live to see a new shoreline, a new world, a new way of being, a new way of leading. Hence, quantum of disruption. Now, when you do this intervention next Saturday on the 27th, we will start by contextualizing the world as what we experience it today and unpack the hypotheses that drove the genesis of this leadership CrossFit intervention. The hypothesis that leadership, as we know and have come to experience it in today, leadership is kind of stuck in what my PhD promoter back in the day, Professor Toby de Koning, referred to as mechanistic entrapment. Mechanistic entrapment of typical leadership institutions thought paradigms that we argue have almost, in a sense, paralyzed leaders' ability to change the polarized world that we have experienced during this pandemic so clearly. This polarized world that's created through the economic drivers that's embedded in these leadership frameworks. It's almost, as those before us would have said in old school jargon, things have gone too far. And maybe we need something new. Well, not really just something new, something distinctly different. As if the canvas is white again, and we need to reconceptualize these spatial configurations to help us be better leaders. And we argue that unless we break with this entrapment, events like COVID-19 will bring us further polarization in the globe, bringing it closer to what I call the tipping point of global shame. So just on this theme of economic entrapment, okay, mechanistic entrapment, very interesting. Let me change track for a while. Very interesting. There's a video by this gentleman. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a Belarusian American entrepreneur. Maybe you've seen some of his videos on YouTube or elsewhere in social media. Maybe you've even had the chance to attend one of his conferences. And why I want to share this very quickly is in this particular video, he talks about the school system that is redundant or outdated. And he argues the reason for this is, and I'm sure we can all remember our school days, the school system is primarily based on the ability to memorize and to recall information. A function, he argues, which is much better served through Google, Siri, Alexa, whatever. And he argues, therefore, that the internet made the school system redundant. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I'm sure that there's a lot of sense in what he's saying. But the other interesting thing is, what's very interesting is when I play the video to most of the CEOs I work with, they agree with the video. They agree with the speaker that, yeah, there's certainly reason to argue that the school system has become redundant. But these very same leaders that agree that there's mechanistic entrapment in the school system, we need something new, something different, a different way to bring up our children, these very same CEOs that I work with still uses SWOT, an analytical tool by which I determine my strengths, my weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. PEST, by which I look at the environment out there, and it's categorized and segmented into politics, economy, social trend changes, technology. And Porter's 5 forces, where I look at the competitive marketing landscape. I have existing rivalry, I have suppliers, buyers, new entrants, and substitute products. So they still use these conceptualizations of the reality of the business world that they need to lead within when strategizing. Frameworks that are respectively 61 years, 54 years, and 42 years old. But we don't think that is dated. We think that the school system is dated, trapped in mechanistic entrapment, and we agree with what Gary says. But in our own organizations, we still use very dated frameworks to help us to lead, to strategize, to come up with better ways of leading. And this is the critical question that we ask. So during this 6-hour CrossFit Quantum of Disruption intervention, for which registration has opened, and again, you'll receive a link after today's session, we will critically challenge a number of constructs of typical 20th and 21st century leadership paradigms, such as the ones I just shared with you. We will look at these paradigms and framework with the aim of exposing the fallacies embedded in them, questioning the assumptions that precede the spatial conceptualizations they have formed of the realities they claim to represent. All of which has led to a world struggling to triangulate the balance between business, nature, and human species. Now, why do I say struggling? Well, I mean, just the other day, there was a YouTube video that was doing the rounds, and it shows a piece of ice that broke off the Arctic. This piece of ice, ladies and gentlemen, is 490 square miles in size. That is 20 times the size of Manhattan. And yet, we have companies that are still doing business in the same way that they have been doing it for decades, almost still stuck in the second industrial revolution, not even having progressed to the third and the fourth in terms of alternative sources of energy, all in the perpetual pursuit of profit, not willing to lose sight of existing shorelines. So that's just a little bit of the context, okay? Let me give you some more detail on what to expect when you do the actual 6-hour intervention. We will be looking at a number of topics. First and foremost, I gave you the context. Then we will discuss the narrative of economic fragility, where we look at, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information on that this morning, where we look at what the world looks like today, that we as business leaders have contributed to. And in doing that, we're going to look at what I call the dark side of value created and value captured, looking at existing, well-recognized methods of strategizing, methods that we have been taught at leadership institutions globally. From there, we will look at, amongst others, tolerance of ambiguity, which is one of the future fit skills that you require to lead better in the future. There are others as well that we will look at. And then we take a peek into this future within which you need to lead in a better way. We will look at government and large business, almost as two peas in a pod. We will look at technology, something that's very prominent. I mean, it's all around us. We're using it today for this session. But we look at a different dimension, looking at it as a wolf in sheep's clothing, asking that question. And then in the final instance, I will share with you the leadership revolution, which is the article that Marina referred to in terms of how we need to lead going forward. So let's talk a little bit about this second topic, economic fragility. So I've now given you some context in terms of what quantum of disruption is all about and what has led to this workshop. Now let's talk about economic fragility. This is what the world looks like today, a snapshot of it. We argue that our economic systems of today are really paralyzed by the COVID-19 lockdown disruption globally. But more than this, again, we hypothesize that this paralysis, and by the way, all these names that you see flashing here next to me on the screen, these are all names of companies, amongst others. There's thousands more that have filed for liquidation, filed for bankruptcy during this time. And we argue that this paralysis is not just a function of the global lockdown and the realities of a pandemic. No, we argue that this paralysis is as much, if not more, a function of, and we looked at all of these organizations, poor leadership or a lack of leadership, inflexibility of leaders, people at the top that are simply not willing to make changes, to listen to different perspectives, different opinions, ignorance, arrogance, a big one, fixed-mindedness, greed, much more function of that than what it is a function of the pandemic. Now, you might wonder, why do I say that? I mean, what is the basis of the argument? Well, to stick to this one topic of discussion for now, the economy, if you think about it, is the outcome of something that we as people do. I mean, it's not a system of self-creation and sustainment. Even the now much talked about closed loop system of cryptocurrency and blockchain that give rise to establishing a truly free market trade possibility without the penalty of middleman costs to a supply chain. Even that evolvement, this closed loop system, is a function of the output of people's doing. It's not a function of self-creation and self-sustainment. So we basically bring about the economy as you know it today. And in this economy of today, ladies and gentlemen, the one that constitutes the outcome of people's actions, we critically evaluate current leadership's role in its pursuit and formation. We look critically at leadership's perilous impact as it co-contributes to a two-states world of rich and poor. A world that is, again, becoming divided. There's so much research that we have done where we have picked up this trend, this growing trend of nation states pulling back from globalization and again embracing deglobalization. We will also, when we talk about economic fragility, we refer a lot to the world that we have seen during the time of the pandemic. That's where we got our research from. That's where we got the argument from. We look at COVID-19 vaccine nationalism. I mean, if you think about it, there's a pandemic, there's a vaccine that's supposed to do good, be provided to all, make the world healthy again. And yet there's this rise in what is now being termed vaccine nationalism. And we will correlate all of these elements that we have observed during our research. We will correlate that to what business leaders are being taught currently at leadership development institutions globally as these leaders progress to so-called levels of success. What does this success consist of? What is the criteria? We ask why seemingly profitability is still viewed as the number one criteria when we quote successful companies. Now, you might argue and say to me, Steyn, but it's not like that. Well, then I have to tell you that fortunately, unfortunately, currently I teach for about 4 different international business schools here in the UAE. I currently reside in Dubai. I've been here for about 6-7 years. And every time when I'm being sent case studies, I teach in the subject matter of strategy, more specifically global strategy, global business strategy. When I'm sent case studies by these business schools, it's all about companies that are successful because they're profitable. So we ask, during this intervention, we ask the uncomfortable to some, almost peculiar question of how it is possible that the most educated human race by proportion in time, the most educated human race by proportion in time, during this time, how is it possible that it still leaves us at such extreme opposites in the world as we struggle with this conundrum of saving lives and saving livelihoods amidst the pandemic? How is that possible? What have we learned, if anything, from 9/11, 2007, 2014, 2018? I can carry on. COVID-19, yes, it's very disruptive, but ladies and gentlemen, this is not the first disruption. What have we learned from it? If after all this time, after all those lessons, after all those disruptions, we still have such an unbalanced world. Now, we try to answer these and other questions. We will explore commonly taught principles and directional strategies as part of business growth and success, i.e. profitability, as I just mentioned, and how to achieve that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at what you're being taught. If you're a business leader and you attend a typical MBA, what are they teaching you as we try to find answers to this question of a world so divided? And here we talk specifically of the dark side of value created and value captured. Now, I'm going to do a little teach piece here, okay? So just to conceptualize and to explain a little bit. I've given you an introduction this morning on quantum of disruption, where it comes from, how we came about it, and why we decided upon it. And then we looked at economic fragility. It's just a peek into the world of today. And now we move to the third theme, which is the dark side of value created and value captured. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, as example, if you attend an MBA, at some point in time, people will teach you strategy. And in strategy, really, there's 2 main streams in terms of the focus or the direction that you take. The one is a willingness to pay, and the other one is a willingness to sell. Okay, what does this mean? And what has this got to do with economic fragility? And what has this got to do with the world divided? Well, I'm going to make it simple for you. Let's talk about willingness to pay. You see that there's cost of inputs into a business. There's a margin, okay? So you have X amount that you spend to provide a service or a product. You then add value to that. So you have a premium that you charge, and that's how you drive profitability. The willingness to pay principle in terms of strategy is where you add something more, which is perceivedly increasing the value add, and therefore people are willing to pay more for it. I'm going to use a simple example. I like a good donut. So in the mornings when I go to the office, I stop by a Zoom. It's a convenience store just down the road for me. And I buy one and I eat it as I drive. Cost me about 3 dirham, which is about, in American dollar terms, about 80 cents. Now the Zoom, they've realized that I do this frequently. So what they now do is they now offer a service whereby they bring me the donut to my home in the mornings before I leave for the office, along with a very nicely fresh brewed cup of coffee. And for this, I now pay 7 dirham, more than double what I used to pay. But it doesn't cost them that much more. But there's now a perceived increase in value, convenience. I feel taken care of. And that's how they increase profitability. That's the one model, willingness to pay. I'm not going to focus so much on willingness to pay when we look at this economic fragility, when we look at this world divide. I'm more going to look at willingness to sell. What is willingness to sell? In simple terms, it's to drive costs as low as possible. And yet, when we teach this on an MBA, when we teach this to our business leaders, it kind of makes perfect sense, right? I want to bring my cost down as much as possible, right? But how do I do it? Do I do it by squeezing wages, trying to push it down as low as possible? Do I do it by playing off my suppliers against one another and see how low they can go without any concern really if there's a supplier in the process that's not going to make it, that's going to go out of business, that's going to have to put people on the street? That's the fundamental problem we have with this as an example. So during this boot camp, during this CrossFit intervention, we will look at what are you being taught, what are you doing, and how does that contribute, correlate to the world that we are seeing today. Another one is looking at this willingness to buy, willingness to sell. We look at the rise of China. Now, there's some politicians, some economists, some business leaders that have a great problem with the economic and political rise of China. Now, I'm not going to get into that debate, but I will say this. In 2003, the contribution, the export GDP of China was, as you can see there, 438 billion. Fast forward 15 years later, it's almost 5 times that. Almost 5 times that. Now, how did that happen? This is where we argue. China did not create China. The world created China. If you are taught across the globe that the way to increase profitability is by reducing cost, obviously you must have your product manufactured at a place in the world where the cost is lowest. You know, at one point, the statistic that we had from China was that 87% of all white goods sold internationally, that's all your kitchen appliances, manufactured in China. During COVID, this past year, you'll be surprised, maybe not even surprised, maybe you're one of those leaders. How many business leaders came to me and said to me, Steyn, we're in trouble. We don't have stock. I have to lay off people. I'm going to have to shut my doors. We don't have stock. Why? Well, it comes out of China. Only China? Yes, it only comes out of China. Okay, so how is that possible? You want to tell me that you only have one place of origin for your raw material or your finished goods? Only one. No diversification, no contingency, no other substitute areas. No, why not? Well, it's the cheapest there. And if it's the cheapest there, our profit is the highest. not looking at the risk embedded in that. And that's what we're going to discuss. Critically look at the world as we are seeing it today. So many people arguing it's Corona, it's COVID. No, it isn't. We argue it's what you've been taught, it's what you have been doing, and how that slowly but surely, without us necessarily seeing that, created a world which is very unbalanced. So it's not the aftermath of the pandemic, it's what we as leaders do. So how do we change this? How do we move forward? I mean, yes, we know the world is a mess, and we know it's disrupted, and we know that the world of work has changed. We know all these things, Steyn, you might say to me. So what next? Again, I conceptualize quantum of disruption for you. I told you what the world looks like in terms of economic fragility, economic systems that rose because of what we do in our businesses. I told you how easily we can contribute to that as business leaders in terms of what we've been taught. Now you want to move forward. So moving forward, we look at future fit leadership skills. There are 15 well-identified, well-researched future leadership skills. One of them is tolerance for ambiguity. Do you have tolerance for ambiguity? Do you even know what it is? What is tolerance of ambiguity? How do I measure it? How do I develop it? Because moving into the future, you're going to require a significantly different leadership skill set. So it's not just doom and gloom. I'm not just going to tell you that the world is on its head. No, I'm going to tell you what you need during this CrossFit intervention of how to move forward. And then, of course, you might want to know and say, okay, Steyn, you've now tell us what the world looks like and where it all came from. What is it going to look like in the future? And here's a couple of very interesting themes that we look at. One of them is really my personal favorite, to be honest, where we look at government and multinational organizations as two peas in a pod. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, we kind of take a peek into the future of a world governed possibly more by big business than just politics. And you might ask me where this notion comes from. Why am I saying it? It sounds a little bit like a sci-fi movie. It's a notion that appeared onto the radar after Twitter clipped Donald's wings. You probably all heard about that. It was international news that Donald Trump was accused of this sort of attack on Capitol Hill. And during that time, Twitter decided that they're going to close his account. Whilst he was still at the time, and this is intriguing, whilst he was still at the time holding office of what is believed to be the most powerful individual in the world. Yet, his account was brought to a close by a company. Didn't agree with what he was saying, being judge, jury, and executioner. So, what are the future trends of governments and large multinational organizations that we need to be aware of as we navigate into the future? Again, we try to answer this. We compare similarities between this, what I call COVID, almost fascist style like social experiment of governmental superpower displayed during international lockdowns. We look at that and we look at the phenomenon of global dominance of multinational business conglomerates. So yeah, a little bit of a peek into the future. Now, another thing, of course, that will play a big part in the future, it's already playing a big part, but even more, a bigger part, is that of technology, artificial intelligence. So during quantum of disruption, during this intervention, we also asked the question whether maybe technology is a wolf in sheep's clothes. Now, why would I say something like that? Surely technology is there to aid us, to help us. Look at the research. Look at how fast we came up with vaccines, all because of development in technology. Yes, definitely a lot of positives. But at the same time, I invite you, if you haven't watched the Netflix documentary yet on the social dilemma, I invite you to go and watch it. Because in this, they talk of what I call the revulsion of the commercialization of human beings, where we are actually now the products that's being sold. So the more following there is on specific sites, the higher the price for advertising. So we are being commercialized. So we look at that. How do we need to manage it? What's the ethics, the values that's embedded in that or impacted on by that? And then from there, during the CrossFit intervention, we will look at, finally, the leadership revolution. Now, what is the leadership revolution? Where does it come from? Okay, so for me to explain it, just backtrack again. We've looked at quantum of disruption. Where does it come from? We're trying to determine, the outcome, the content, what all is involved when we look at the interaction between disruption and leadership. We looked at economic fragility, the world as we know it today. We look at typical leadership development initiatives, even in an MBA, and how that co-contributes to this economic fragility, the dark side of value creation. We then said, okay, that's what it looks like. What do I need going forward? We're going to take you through the future fit leadership skills. And then you might wonder, what does the future look like? There we're going to look at government, at business, and technology primarily. Now, to help you to better lead in the future, we bring to you what we call the leadership revolution. Marina, when she introduced me, made mention of the fact that I'm an HBR author. So about a year ago, myself and Dr. Wada, my partner, we introduced a framework, a leadership framework. And in this, we covered 4 key traits required for the future in terms of leadership. The first one is how to think differently. So we try to display this here in this illustration. Thinking to change. We look at thought leaders during this session that revolutionizes aged thought paradigms, and I've made many references to those, for strategic competitiveness and balanced sustainability. We then look at learning to excel, looking at leaders that continuously learn. Satya Nadella of Microsoft is one name that comes to mind. Embracing future technologies as enablers for a better world where human and machine intelligences plate together for an imagined ideal future. 3, act to achieve. There we look at doers, surpassing what we are all so tired of, just empty promises and passionate speeches, but people that implement real change. And 4, inspirers of greatness, focusing on greatness in all of us, the current and the next generation, young and old, where we harness wisdom from the older generation and we plate it together with imagination and dreams of the younger generation. So, to summarize, coming to the end just before I hand back to Marina. Topic 1, understanding quantum of disruption. Topic 2, looking at the narrative of economic fragility. What does the world look like today? Topic 3, how have we, knowingly, unknowingly, consciously, subconsciously, through what we have been taught as business leaders so far, how have we co-created, co-contributed to this economic fragility? And I call that the dark side of value creation. Topic 4, What do you need to go forward? We obviously, what got us here, it's not going to get us there. So there we look at a set of future fit leadership skills, tolerance for ambiguity, and a number of others. Do you have it? How do you get it? How do you develop it? How do you measure it? 5, what does this future look like? There we look at government, we look at large business, and then during topic 6, we look at technology, the role that technology will play in the future. In the final instance, through the leadership revolution, we will provide you with the ability to lead, as we said from the beginning, in a dramatically different way going forward.